I did not get the Artemis to display it, but I have the video. Yep, I couldn't move the screen up into it.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start our presentation today. Hopefully there's some people listening to me on the camera, and if not, come on down if you're available to see me. I know there's a lot of great excursions today, and it is the last day of our cruise, so I'm sure everybody's very tired by now. A 2-week cruise can be pretty long. But this slideshow presentation that I have is in particular going to be about what I call rogues of the sea. So this is going to be where we're going to talk about pirates, wreckers, scallywags, privateers, all the good stuff that is part of Florida history. And so for that purpose, I did not actually put up a star on there. Ooh, that was weird. I did not actually put up a star for where we are, because this is going to be all of the water. So we're going to mostly talk about what it was like to be able to defend Florida and her borders. So before we get into that, I kind of want to make sure that I put you a little bit again into the mindset of what it is like to try to be part of the Florida stability. Florida spent over 300 years of not just political stability, but religious stability, exploration stability. There's a lot of things going on in her long history, and I'm going to be here to explain a lot of that to you. I told you before, Juan Ponce de Leon is going to arrive in 1513, and he is going to claim Florida for Spain. He's going to come during the Easter season, and he is going to see the beautiful flowers in the area and name it after the Feast of the Flowers, or La Florida. Beautiful area, but he is not able to actually make any sort of permanent settlement in the area. In fact, it won't be until 1565 when Pedro Menendez de Aviles is going to land in St. Augustine and found it and create a settlement. This settlement is going to be a response to the French Huguenots, or the Protestants, trying to establish Fort Caroline versus the Spanish, the Catholics. What's going on in the bigger picture of the world is Martin Luther stamped his 95 Theses on the church door, and he is going to proclaim the revolution. This is going to be the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. That's going on in Europe at the time. And some of that's going to bleed over into Florida. St. Augustine is going to be famously known and significant because it is the oldest continuously occupied European established settlement in the continental United States. It was founded 55 years before Plymouth, founded before Jamestown. It's going to be consistently occupied. That's the key for this one. From 1565, when we are able to establish, by we, I mean the Spanish in this case, are able to establish, it's going to remain under Spanish control until about 1763. Any idea what's happening in 1763? This is going to be the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War. And after the 7 Years' War, Spain is going to cede Florida over to Great Britain, and she is going to be in her control all the way through the Revolution. And so the American Revolution is actually going to remain a loyalist hotspot Florida is going to remain a loyalist hotspot during the American Revolution. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Great Britain's going to divide Florida into two sections. She's going to split her into East Florida with the capital in St. Augustine, and West Florida with the capital in Pensacola. I don't have the full map here of Florida, but you have St. Augustine, and then you have Pensacola over in the Panhandle area. This is going to cause a lot of tension for a couple years. The idea was that they would go back and forth between these capitals for their annual meetings and for discussions so that they could give the entire territory the respect it deserves. It's not going to work out very well, and they're going to say, well, we need to figure out how to get in the middle. That's how we got Tallahassee as the capital today. After the American Revolution, with Great Britain's loss, they are going to return Florida to Spain under the Treaty of Paris, the Second Treaty of Paris. And it's not going to be until 1821 when Spain is going to transfer Florida to the United States under the Adam-Onis Treaty. And this is going to officially define that boundary line between the United States, a new country at this time, and Spain, or Spanish Florida. It's going to draw an imaginary line that goes a little further. Spanish are still out in the west exploring. The English are not able to necessarily get that far out. In fact, when the British are in charge of the United States, they say that everything a little bit west of the Mississippi is going to be called Native American territory. It's unoccupied. They're going to actively resist anyone going into that area because they cannot provide for their safety. And so you're not going to see a lot of exploration right at first from Great Britain or the United States west of the Mississippi. You'll see a lot from Spain though. And this is where you get a lot of these beautiful stories. A lot of them are mythical. We've talked about the Fountain of Youth. We've talked about a couple other things. We'll talk some more about some mythological things as we get going here, especially when I talk to you about the pirates that are going to be around Florida. So let me just wanted to make sure I gave you that little bit of time period so you know what we're really focused on. I do not know why this is working, so please tell me if you want me to just abandon and shout. I can. All right, so St. Augustine. You all have been to the St. Augustine area, hopefully walked around it. I know we're in Jacksonville now, but we have had a couple times that the boat was able to bring you over to St. Augustine, at least by land. St. Augustine is going to be a strategic area for the Spanish. It's part of a very large Gulf Stream around the area, but more importantly, it's going to be part of their trade system. They have a convoy system known as the flota system, and it's going to take gold from present-day Bolivia and Mexico, and it's going to transfer it to Spain. What it's going to do is it's going to allow this shipment to go from the areas of Central America and South America and other parts of Western United States, and it's going to move that over to the Cuban area, to Havana, where they can do a majority of their trade. From there, they're going to be able to move that over to Spain. So it's a complex convoy system that is part of this area here. It's pretty cool. It's going to allow them to time that Gulf Stream. It's going to allow them to move as far as they can forward. It's also going to cause a little bit of chaos. I'm sure you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle. 100% Bermuda Triangle is part of that Gulf Stream network. We didn't know what it was before, and now we do. That's a big reason why you see some ships that may have been sunk in one area or did sink, and then you find the debris miles and miles away. The Gulf Stream is carrying them to different locations. You'll see that from Havana in Cuba, a lot of these shipments would depart annually. It was part of the Spanish route to continuously bring this gold over to Spain. They wanted to continue to help the empire. They wanted to be profitable. But as much as you would think that Florida would be the point of where the brilliance of gold and silver, Florida has no gold and silver. Florida is not the place where you're going to find these riches. You're going to find them in Central America. You're going to find them in Mexico. And because of that, that's where you see Florida start to evolve into kind of that middle area. They're going to stop here, refuel. They're going to figure out what they need to do with that gold, disperse it as they will, and send it on. It's going to make Florida's coastline one of the most heavily trafficked places. It has a lot going on along its borders. Need I remind you that Florida has over 8,000 miles of land that touches the ocean. One of the longest coastlines for a state in the continental United States, right? So Alaska has a lot, California has a lot. Florida has a unique one as well. Not only does she have to defend the Gulf Coast area, but she's going to need to defend the Atlantic side as well. Yeah, so this is going to be a massive, massive partaking. One of the most famous disasters is going to occur on July 31st, 1715. This is when a hurricane is going to strike the area, and it's going to basically destroy a whole bunch of the fleet. 11 of 12 ships are going to be wrecked. Over 1,000 sailors and passengers are going to die. There's heavy losses aboard. And they're going to have millions of dollars or pesos worth of gold and silver on board. To this day, there is still gold along those borders that you can pick up. Now, the state of Florida has said that if you're going to pick up this gold, the first thing you should do is you should please bring it to a museum. It's of historic importance. Let the state of Florida determine if this is some of that gold that needs to be put into a museum. If they want to give it to you, they'll tell you to take it back. If not, they'll share with you. So if you do happen upon some of these gold down in Davy Jones' locker, bring it back to the surface, share it with the rest of his historians, and then spend your millions of pesos right after that. The Spanish salvage operations are going to continue for many years. After those 11 ships sink, they want their gold back. They're going to continue getting it. Again, there's still gold there today. So it is something that you can look at. And it is kind of cool to think of it, right? Not only is there gold below, but we've all seen all the pirate movies and wondered what it truly was like to be aboard them. Well, you can kind of see that along Florida's shores. What was life like as a soldier, a colonial soldier, on the waters of Florida? And more importantly, what was it like to just be on the water for long periods of time? I'm sure some of you have heard of scurvy. Scurvy's not good, right? You're going to have bouts of scurvy happen with many of the sailors on board. And in fact, one of the prevailing theories is that Ponce de Leon was the one who brought the orange trees over from Spain. They are not native to Florida, and planted the first one. Can I confirm this? Honestly, I wasn't there, but I'd like to think maybe that sounds like a cool myth to go with as opposed to the Fountain of Youth. And so he is going to start cultivating, or the earth is going to start cultivating all these orange trees, and Native Americans are going to help with it more than anyone else. They're going to continue moving these orange trees around Florida. And in fact, orange growing was profitable, and because the temperatures were vastly different, you could see oranges as high as South Carolina area when they were with the British. So this is like the 1700s. Early on, you're going to see these oranges are going to be a vital part of that sailor life. And in fact, a lot of them are going to have these orange trees on board. They're going to grow them and continue to try to get those oranges from them to make them profitable for themselves so that they're able to keep their sailors healthy. The average age range of a lot of these sailors is going to actually be from 15 to 25. We do not have the same laws that we do today on when you can join the military. You can join at 17 in most branches with your parents' approval, or you can join at 18 when you become a legal adult. 15 was an age that was acceptable for you to send your son off into the maritime world, and many of them did. Unfortunately, what they found on board could be pretty tough, right? Diet aboard is going to be very limited. You're going to have some salted beef and pork here and there. Of course, fishing is going to be pretty big, but it's not like you have any agriculture on board. Maybe some of the oranges at some point, right? But if we're still in the early 1500s, I don't have that yet. You're not going to have the bedding that you want. You're going to have to share with some people depending on what's going on. Maybe the person next to you is sick. Maybe some of these people don't really belong on the water. They get seasick. They don't really, the land life is more for them. But they're going to be part of this process because it seems like a glamorous life to them. They're not quite sure what it's like, but also freedom of the seas, right? Getting on the water, getting out there and being part of the world. Discipline is going to be very strict. Flogging is common. I did not put a picture of flogging on there because they are not pretty pictures. But flogging is going to be the main form of discipline, and it's also going to be one of the first forms of punishment that you're going to see in our early history. The crew is going to be pretty diverse. It wasn't uncommon to see freed African Americans in the area. It wasn't uncommon to see Native Americans. It wasn't uncommon to see somebody who may have been affluent in regular times, but now wants to go off and be a sailor. So it was very common to see an array of people on board here. And that's what's going to make up the beauty of being on board these ships, is that diversity, that understanding of what's going around. Now, I talked to you a bit about Spanish Florida, right? So Juan Ponce de Leon is going to land in this area here, which is like the Mobile Beach area. He is going to do the first landing in 1513. He's going to continue to sail around. If you were here yesterday for my presentation, Ponce de Leon goes around Florida, all along the Cuban area. He's trying to figure out what's around Florida, right? It's pretty early in time. They haven't really explored further up. They don't know if Florida is an island or if Florida is just part of a larger landmass. So he's going to keep going around, and he's going to land in the Marco Island area at about 1521, and that's where he's going to meet the Calusa. Now, if you've heard me talk about the Calusa, you know that Ponce de Leon's story does not end well. He is shot by a poison arrow while trying to fight the Calusa. He escapes to Cuba, where he later dies that same year in 1521. So Ponce de Leon's journey ends there, and it's not going to be for almost another 40 years before Menendez de Aviles is going to attempt to come back and create that settlement. Remember, that's the settlement that's at St. Augustine, not the Castillo yet. Castillo de San Marcos is going to be built 107 years later in the 1600s, and it's going to be a response after the British burned the original fort and settlement that's there. So the one that Aviles makes is mostly wood, so don't think too far ahead at this point. Aviles is going to create this area here, and then eventually when the French arrive, right, Fort Caroline, that's going to be that big battle that he's trying to push out the French Huguenots but keep the Spanish Catholic missionaries in the area. That's going to be a massive battle, and eventually that's going to be what is created as Jacksonville, and so the French are going to settle in that area. So Florida is going to be chronically underfunded by Spain. This is mostly because it is considered that middle ground, right? So you have gold coming from one area, kind of stopping in this area, and then going to the mother country of Spain. Florida doesn't have these same resources. It's difficult to settle there. It's hard to deal with the native populations. The Calusa killed Ponce de Leon. They're constantly resisting anyone in the area. Where on the other side, in Mexico and in Central America, they're able to overwhelmingly raid them. They're able to take over those nations. They're able to take their gold. They have something there that they're able to use as profit to bring back to Spain. Florida doesn't have that. Not only does she not have that, she's in the middle of the Caribbean. She's in the middle of that area that they're trying to defend in Mexico. At the same time, they're thousands of miles across the ocean in Spain hearing all of this. There's a lot of land that Spain is trying to defend, and one of the ones that's the hardest to defend is going to be Florida. They're constantly pumping a lot of money into trying to defend this land, but they're not getting anything from it. And so they actually start to restrict colonial trade along the Spanish ports and nearby colonies in order to try to stop some of this raiding from happening. They try to open up different trade routes. They try to have different agreements with them. Shipments could be delayed for long periods of time if caught, right? Another thing to consider is the weather. Hurricanes. Hurricanes are not something that you really see in Spain, England, France, right? This is something that comes across the Atlantic, it's swept over, it gets caught up. I'm not a meteorologist or a weather scientist or whatever. I can't get into that 100%, but I can tell you that these areas around the Gulf and around the Atlantic are prime hurricane spots. And the Spanish are not going to 100% understand or know when a hurricane is coming. It's not something that they've studied, it's not something they know. So when a hurricane destroys something like it did with the flotilla that went by, it's going to be devastating. Losing 11 out of 12 ships is very devastating, and it's going to hurt the Spanish throughout the majority of the ownership of Florida. It's a big reason why Florida constantly is changing hands. Who can afford Florida? Who can defend Florida, right? By the late 1600s and early 1700s, you're going to start to see a huge illicit trade market grow through. And this is where we're starting to get into the pirates. This is where we're going to start getting into the questionable gray area of the wreckers that are in the area, right? Because this trade is vital to the people now settling in Florida. It's also vital to continue that economy there. They want people to come into Florida. They want it to grow. And by they, it's going to change hands. It could be the British, it could be the Spanish, and then eventually the United States. We'll break that down as I go through the remainder of the slides. All right, so British Florida. So after 1763, the British are going to try to make Florida economical. They're going to attempt to develop her, right? So they've been able to take over the land. They've had the French and Indian War. It's been a bit of a success. They want to issue land grants, and that's exactly what they're going to do, is they're going to issue multiple land grants to people in order to encourage an agricultural or plantations to come down. This is going to mostly be indigo, rice, and later some cotton, and then eventually oranges. We're not quite at that time yet. Remember, I've mentioned this many times. During the American Revolution, Florida was owned by Great Britain. She was loyal to the British during that war. And Florida, especially East Florida, is going to serve as a base for a lot of British military operations. So this is going to be another reason why we can claim St. Augustine has always been continuously owned, right? There's always been somebody occupied inside of her, and that's going to happen during the American Revolution. This is going to be an area where loyalists can go and they can find other loyalists. It starts to expand as people are leaving the other southern states, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, as they're getting more and more involved in the War of American Independence. They're going to see this as a sanctuary area that they can go to. Even as merchants are still trading at the same time between multiple countries. Remember, even though this is a loyalist area for them, there's still a lot of Florida, right? So mostly in the north, we're going to remain pretty loyal, but the southern tip of Florida, the Key West, is going to boom. Boom because they're one of the major trade areas. They're intercepting that trade between Spain and between Central America and between Mexico. So you're going to see that even with wars going on, Florida consistently is trying to insert herself, and she's still not able to quite be tamed. I love that part of the story. All right, so I've mentioned privateers, I've mentioned pirates. What does all of this mean? Well, in order to be an official privateer and be able to say that you are not a scallywag, a pirate, you're doing something illegal, you needed a beautiful letter of marque. A letter of marque declares that you are fighting for a specific reason. Think of Queen Anne's War in 1702 to 1713, or the War of Jenkins' Ear, 1739 to 1748. Privateering is going to be used in many of these conflicts as a quick way for the crown to hire somebody to let them do some of the things that she doesn't quite want to put on paper, but that need to get done. And a lot of these are going to be in that gray area of what is truly a privateer and what is a pirate. A lot of the things they do as a privateer with a letter of marque, they're going to do later once they no longer have that letter of marque, and they are going to be considered pirates. No difference to what they were doing at that point. Large numbers of experienced sailors, right? So these 15 to 25-year-olds that have joined the Navy, that have asked to be part of the British crown, right? Or the French crown, or whatever crown we're talking about, mostly British in this one. They are going to be experienced now. They have served in different wars. They had their letters of marque, and now they have found themselves out of a job. Not only have they found themselves out of a job, but they found themselves without any other direction to go. Their whole life was working on the seas, right? And so this is where you're going to start to see those same people that had these letters of marque move into the new territory of piracy, mostly because they have found themselves unemployed. The golden age of piracy is going to be between 1715 and 1725. This is going to be where we're going to see, and I'm going to talk about a lot of those famous pirates that we know, and one of them is going to be Blackbeard. We'll get to him, don't you worry. But one of the easiest way to think about privateers to me is that they're pirates with permission. They have their letters of marque, and they're able to do the same things that they're going to not be able to do legally later. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the famous pirates that I'm sure some of you know. And one of them that was around Florida, I'm sure you know of him in the North Carolina, South Carolina area. But here in Florida, Blackbeard, or Edward Teach, is going to operate between about 1716 and 1718, so during that golden age of piracy. He became a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession, which ended in 1713. And again, like many others, he realizes he's out of a job. His profession is on the seas. He had a letter of marque. He wants to be on the seas. Well, if that's not going to work, I'm going to do something else. So in 1717, he is going to capture a French slave ship, and he is going to rename her the Queen Anne's Revenge. This is a big deal because that ship had 40 guns on board. It was a 40-gun warship. So now, not only can Blackbeard sail, he has the experience, but he has a ship that's armed. So he is able to have a pirate vessel that is able to go from place to place pretty easily and also defend herself and be offensive at the same time. Most merchant ships actually couldn't fight back. Most merchant ships are not armed. They are just traveling, they're trading, right? This is a totally different view of why we're on the water. It's not going to be because of any military intervention, any military action. But back to Blackbeard. So Blackbeard, one of his most famous standoffs is going to be in May 1718 in the port of Charleston, South Carolina. And it's one of the busiest ports in North America at this time, Charleston. It's a great area for people to go, not just to be in the area, right? So this is between some wars here. We're not quite at the American Revolution. We're not really dealing with the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. But what you're going to see is something that's a little bit bigger than money being requested, and that's medicine. Edward Teach is going to ask for medicine during this blockade. He wants it, he's going to get it, and then a couple years later, he's going to deliberately run the Queen Anne's Revenge aground near Beaufort, North Carolina. Today you can go to that area and you can see the ship under the water, you can see the beautiful displays out there, and you can learn a little bit more about what was going on in Blackbeard's mind. Did he do that because he didn't want to pay the rest of his sailors? Did he do that because he was trying to prevent something? Well, go to North Carolina, learn a little bit more about Edward Teach and Blackbeard, but just know that he actually, by 1718, accepted a royal pardon. He wanted to come back into the fold. He wanted to go back and get his letter of marque. But he is actually going to be killed later on that year at Ocracoke Island in a battle with British naval forces. He went back to piracy. He decided that was the way to go, even though he got his royal pardon. He never leave it in his heart. And so that's where Blackbeard resides today. Now I'm going to tell you another story, and this one is more of that myth. I mentioned when we were in St. Petersburg, Tampa, that there's an annual festival that goes on there every year. If you don't remember, it's okay, it was 2 weeks ago, and that's called Gasparilla. Gasparilla is where, from living in the area for a couple years when I was going to college, an area where they have the pirates invade. It's a great time. You have a festival, you have a parade. It's very family friendly, it's a lot of fun. But what is this actually about, right? So the legend goes that Jose Gasparilla, was a traditional sailor that operated mostly in the Florida's Gulf Coast, particularly around Gasparilla Island or Charlotte Harbor, to put it in a little bit more layman's terms, sometimes in the late 1700s. He was a former Spanish naval officer who turned pirate. What better way to prey on people than in the Gulf of Mexico? It's not the same area as the Atlantic Ocean, right? So you have a lot more pirates on that East Coast side. He wanted to stick with the West Coast side. He could get lost in the Gulf and figure out where he wanted to go. However, there's actually not a lot of evidence of him being around, and there's a little rumor floating around that when Tampa wanted to invite more tourists to the area, they came up with a very beautiful legend about Gaspar so that we could have Gasparilla every year. So take what you will with that. I'd like to think that there's a pirate out there named Gaspar that did go willy-nilly around the Gulf, but I can't actually give you anything more than the fact that today we have the Gasparilla Pirate Festival every year in Tampa, and you can see the pirates invade. So you have Blackbeard, right? A real, well-documented person who worked on the Atlantic, and then you have a myth, a legend along the Gulf. But at the end of the day, all of this is part of the larger story of piracy, of privateering, of what it meant to work on the water. You'll even find in the early history of the United States, we didn't have a navy. We weren't sure if we wanted a standing army. We weren't sure if we wanted to just call up people or if we could just recruit people, right? There's a lot of debate about the water. It's a little easier on land. You can see them, you know what they're doing. You have the great age of exploration that happened around the same time as the Renaissance. This is going to be where you have Christopher Columbus sail across the ocean in 1492. This is where you're going to have the British come across and land in Jamestown. You're going to see the Dutch, the French sail. This is that age of exploration, right? But as that exploration continues, you're going to see a change of what it meant to be that person on board. Are you a sailor? Are you a privateer? Are you a pirate? What are you? A little bit of a definition in there as we continue. So the wreckers. I've talked to you a bit about wreckers, but let me give you a little bit better definition of it. So a wrecker is going to literally be somebody who's going to go out and who's going to salvage a wrecked ship. The goal was to become the first one there. If you were the first ship that made it to the wrecked ship, you could claim the cargo on board. You can bring everybody off of that boat, bring it to a customs office, and they would tell you what you earned from that wreck, right? And it could be something that was on board. Every ship that traveled across the Gulf of Mexico passed through the Florida Straits. They needed to go and stop in Key West for the most part. Key West became the wrecking capital of the world from the 1820s to the 1840s, and that's going to help grow Key West. It's going to make her one of the wealthiest cities in all of the United States because of that, right? Now remember, this is 1820, so think of how big the United States is. Wreckers were licensed salvagers, so much like a privateer, they had a letter of marque that they were able to use to claim that they could go to that wrecked ship, that wrecked boat, and help offload the cargo, help those people on board, right? But I gotta ask you something. What is stopping me from moving a light from a buoy that tells you there's a reef there and just letting you figure out that there's a reef there? And then I can claim your salvaged materials, right? Pretty easy maybe, right? There is a lot of evidence of this happening, and this is why you see a little bit of that gray area when it comes to the wreckers of the world, right? When you brought that cargo on shore, they would determine in a federal court, depending on what federal was at that level, it could be a crown, right? And they would tell you how much that cargo's value was worth. From there, they would tell you based on the risk that you took, the effort that you took, what you were actually able to salvage, what you yourself could bring back. And if you knew that there was a ship carrying a ton of pesos and you just needed it to wreck a little bit off the shore because it needed to come into the port anyway, and oh my gosh, how great are you as a wrecker for saving these people, you should get 50% of that bounty. There you go. You got it. Very true. The Alicia in 1905 ran aground near the Florida Keys. Many wrecking vessels actually went to try to help her. And again, the first one is the one that wins. But the first one from what? If we're all in the same room and it's just us, who got there first? Probably the person who had a little bit more power behind their swing, the person who had a bigger crew, right? And so you're going to see that, especially with the Alicia, that salvaging of the cargo takes weeks. It takes a long time. And in the end, they're going to take all of that cargo, all that profit, and they're going to divide it among the crew. And it's worth your time if you want to go out and find this wreck, right? And so that's where we're going to get Key West is one of the major ports at this time because they're going to be at the center of this wrecking community. Many of the wreckers are going to live in the Keys, and they're going to go out and they're going to try to salvage these ships. All right, so Florida is now going to move from an imperial frontier to American territory. So we have a lot of flags that have flown over Florida. By the mid-1800s, 1821, Great Britain is no longer able to, or Spain is no longer to control the territory anymore. And so it is going to trade off into the Adam-Onis Treaty or the Transcontinental Treaty, and she is now going to be owned by the United States. This is going to be an agreement to cede over, and the U.S. is going to agree to assume up to $5 million in claims. It's just an agreement based on why they wanted to give it up. But one of the reasons that they wanted to give it up and claim money is they're losing money, right? It's really hard to defend Florida. Let me put a little bit more perspective of what's going on the ground now in Florida. By 1818, the U.S. General Andrew Jackson is going to lead the First Seminole War. So I talked a little bit to you about the Timucua, I talked to you a little bit about the Calusa, I talked to you about the Appalachee, the Tequesta. They're all gone. This is 1818. They're dead. Sorry to break it to you. An entire Native American race has been eliminated from Florida. Multiple ones were. So the Seminoles are now going to be the main ones that are going to enter this picture. They are part of the Lower Creek tribe. Some of that is up in Alabama, southern Alabama, and southern Georgia. And they're part of that same language class. They're going to start to come into the area, and immediately you're going to see an issue when land is starting to be claimed. Remember I said that Great Britain has tried to encourage many loyalists after the American Revolution to come into, or during the American Revolution, to come into Florida. This is a loyalist place. I'm trying to sell you land grants. Come in here and I will protect you, right? So you have a lot of land holdings there, and at the same time now we're moving more and more Native Americans into the area, and more of them are trying to defend their place. At the same time, you're going to see a lot of escaped enslaved people come down from the north as well. It's an area where it's a gray area. There's a lot of back and forth during the American Revolution for how, when, and why you could earn your freedom. And some of it was leave the southern states that are part of the United States, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and come into the free state, or the state that is just asking for loyalists, Florida. So you're going to see a lot of formerly enslaved people, escaped enslaved people, come down into Florida. So there's a lot of people in here. Florida is growing. That First Seminole War is going to happen, and it's going to show that even on land, you're not going to have, you're still going to have a resistance fight from Native Americans all around you. That defined boundary, like I talked about, is going to be a big deal too. This is going to come about a little bit later when the U.S. is going to give up its claim for Texas. The U.S. is not quite sure of some of that area out west yet, right? We still haven't done a lot of our exploration. We haven't necessarily reached the Pacific. The Spanish have. The Spanish have been exploring a lot of this area, again, all around Central America, all along Western California, Arizona, Nevada today. All of that was part of the Spanish Empire. And so giving up Florida, when Spain did, is still going to protect her interests out west, but give up some of this feisty land that they're just not able to defend, has no resources that I can actually make money off of, has a bunch of questionable characters in it, right? And we're going to move forward on it. And that's what's going to help the change to Florida in the future. So once the U.S. takes control of Florida, it's not going to be stable overnight, but you're going to start to see a massive change. So the Seminole Wars are from 1816 to 1858. There's a couple of them, and this is going to expand the U.S. military forts and their operations to deal with the Seminole problem. They're going to expand most of their forts, create new forts along the area. The Seminoles came around the central Florida area, especially the middle of Florida. They're kind of all around the Florida area at this point, and they want to resist this movement of these Native Americans. In addition, they have this shift of trying to see if they can establish some sort of tourism. They're a young country, right? We just, by 1821, we have had the War of 1812. We've been able to demonstrate to Great Britain again our superiority, at least a little superiority with our Navy. We've been able to show that we can survive a bombardment. We've been able to show that we can rout out their military again. And we are trying to make that same claim in Florida. And the only way to do that is to settle in it. You have to have people there. You need to grow a town. You need to have operations. You need to have a center, right?
so that you can actually show, this is my land, these are my people, this is part of my nation. And that's what's going to happen. Key West is going to continue to remain very critical, especially for the wreckers, but also that trade, right? So it's only 90 miles away from Cuba. Havana is a massive port. It's still a massive port in this day. They want to continue trading. They want to keep going around the Caribbean. They want to work with Central America. And so this is going to continually help the congestion, even though all the empires have slowly evolved into an actual national republic. So this area becomes very comforting for Florida. They know that they have Native Americans coming in and out. They know that it has changed hands multiple times, right? You have the many flags of Florida. You have the Spanish yen, English, the Confederacy, and then the United States. Florida is going to be the third state to secede from the Union during the Civil War, and she's not going to see a lot of action. In fact, one of the major things that the Union is going to do is what's called the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan is going to be exactly that. They're trying to squeeze the resources out of the area. So they are going to surround as best they can Florida, and they're going to prevent shipping. They're going to press people into the military if they can, especially the Navy. They're going to disrupt everything that is part of the economy of Florida. This Anaconda Plan is going to work very well, especially as they start making it up the Mississippi. There's a couple battles, the Battle of Natural Bridge, the Battle of Aleutians. They're very smaller skirmishes, nothing like some of the massive battles that you have heard, Gettysburg, Chancellorsville, Vicksburg. Those are all going to be mostly in the northern states, not Florida. They're going to be further north. But they are going to be part, it is going to contribute to that gray area in Florida. You could still try to escape to Florida if you were able to make it. You had, again, that loyalist understanding from the British early on, and they're going to try to bring these populations down there. It still is something that is seen as a place for you to go and disappear if you needed to, at least early on in our history. All right, everybody, so that is the end of my talk for you. I have very much enjoyed being with you all for the last 2 weeks, and since this is my last presentation, if you had any questions, if you want any of my slideshows, or you want to have any of my notes, please feel free to email me, call me, happy to give you that information. If you want to follow my travels, that's my travel blog there. But it has been a great pleasure talking to you, and I will still be here for a couple more minutes answering any questions you have. Thank you all for coming down here. I know we're getting to the end of the week, so it's sparse, but I really appreciate you being here and listening to me. Thanks.